All right, hello, I'm back now. It's 4:45. Your exam finishes in about 30 minutes, but I'm going to try and go through question 1 really quickly because I think it's really achievable to go through now. And I want to get all this out to you as quickly as possible in a slightly different location. It's my office now. How nice is it? All right, so let's get straight into question 1A, which is going to start with a 2-marker question. Explain what is meant by the goal of full employment. So explain what is meant by is the tough thing there. Because the meant by, you're probably going to get 1 mark for your definition, which is going to be the lowest rate of unemployment possible without running into any unnecessary inflationary, external or environmental pressures, a rate around 4.5% natural unemployment, where no cyclical unemployment exists. If you talk about all those things, it's probably going to be pretty close to what is meant by that. But I think one of the specific things there is going to be for your 2nd mark in the what is meant by, covering that there's no cyclical unemployment, and it's the not causing inflationary pressures without causing, so no cyclical unemployment, not causing inflationary pressures. That is going to be the key point to get yellow mark. So not causing inflation, and that's 1A. That's a pretty cruisy way to start. So hopefully you're all good there. Then we've got 1B. With reference to 1 aggregate demand and 1 aggregate supply side factor, explain why the RBA forecast in February 2021 that unemployment would be around 6% by the end of the year was inaccurate. What I find interesting about this is kind of like, this is VCAR just shooting their shot, because they would have written this in around May, and they would have been guessing that unemployment would not be around 6% at the end of the year, which is not. It's 5.2% now. So there we go. So why it is inaccurate. So 1 AD factor and 1 AS factor. So what you really got to do is talk about why that's inaccurate and reasons for that. So basically they want to know why unemployment's lower than they were expecting. So you're going to probably get 1 mark at the start for describing the situation, or you probably want to describe it first. So like kind of giving a general indication of what the unemployment rate's at now. But your 1 AD factor, so your AD factor, I'm probably going to say eco activity in China or growth in China, driving aggregate demand. So it's going to be 1 aggregate demand side factor. So then you talk about the fact that that increases exports, leading to increased aggregate demand, which creates increased demand for labor. And then that decreases the unemployment rate. So it's going to be your demand side factor. Supply side factor, you could go a lot of different things. You could simply go, like a supply side factor being labor force participation, like whether or not there's actually labor there. That could technically bring it down. But you could go with things as simple as the low interest rates, or you go decrease business tax, and talk about how the fact that those motivated businesses to invest and expand and created more demand for labor, and therefore led to higher rates of employment, and therefore led us to having so increased employment, and that led us to having a rate of unemployment that is lower. So led to unemployment lower than 6%. And getting into that, like you could go into a little bit more of like why is unemployment, well, having increase in underemployment is obviously bad for our overall aggregate supply and productive capacity, labor force participation rate, any of those things, but having to talk about both of those things specifically. So I'm guessing you're probably going to get 2 marks for each factor, and then 1 for kind of your overarching why that 6% was inaccurate. All right, so our next question is with reference to 1 transmission mechanism. Explain how the current, so current being recent, last 2 years, stance being expansionary or contractionary, is designed to influence aggregate demand and the achievement of full employment. As soon as you have the achievement of it, you want to define that goal, be talking about whether it is being achieved or not. In terms of your transmission mechanisms, there are probably 2 here that are a lot easier to talk about. Well, actually a few really. I'd probably talk about this from the focus of businesses in terms of the overall cash flow of businesses or the potential borrowing of businesses to invest, expand, and therefore create more employment. Or you can talk about the exchange rate channel and how lower interest rates lead to a decreased, depreciated exchange rate, and therefore that's going to create more export demand, being more injections to aggregate demand, therefore creating more derived demand for labor and helping us to achieve the rate goal of full employment, which is the lowest rate of unemployment possible without creating any inflationary external pressure, etc. So talk about cash flow, cost of credit, And so if that's businesses, you're going to talk about with cash flow, you're going to be talking about how businesses with variable rate loans now have a higher cash flow, or they're more profitable. They're more likely to invest and expand, so increase investment spending, therefore increasing aggregate demand, which then increases demand for labor and helps to achieve that goal. Obviously, then at the start as well, you need to have a bit of a talk about what the stance is. So expansionary stance, and you'd probably mention being the current stance, being the decreased cash rate to the 0.1% and maintaining that lowered cash rate to 0.1% all through 2021. So they decreased it in November of 2020, but maintained it in 2021. So whichever you talked about, totally fine. And that's basically what it's attempted to do. So if we talked about the exchange rate one as well, if you went for that channel, go exchange rate channel, you'd kind of briefly talk about what it is. You'd say that when cash rates decrease, it leads to lower interest rates. This leads to foreign investors removing their funds from Australian financial institutions in search of greater return elsewhere, which then creates a greater supply of the Australian dollar on the foreign exchange market, leading to a depreciation of the Australian dollar, so decreased AUD. That leads to increased injections through the form of exports, increased aggregate demand, and then the same transmissions to demand for labour and helping to achieve the goal. So hopefully you went with one of those directions and you feel confident in that one. Then for our last part of question 1, explain 2 weaknesses of using monetary policy to achieve full employment. So once again, talking about the goal there, linking it back into whether it's going to be achieved or not. You probably shouldn't have to define the goal here because you've already done it a little bit in the past, talking about whether it is achieved or not under this. So your first weakness is probably going to be monetary policy not effective in a downturn. And you get 2 marks for each weakness. So talk about the fact that when consumer confidence is low, they're unlikely to borrow and go further into debt to then stimulate the economy. Therefore, it doesn't have the increases in aggregate demand that it aims to do. Therefore, there's not more demand for labour. We're less likely to achieve the goal. You'd also use household indebtedness there as a reason why people aren't going to borrow more money when the cash rate is low. And then what I'll do for the next one would be the fact that there are long impact lags. And so because when interest rates get decreased or the cash rate gets decreased, then interest rates flow on from that, people have to actually plan out the investment activities that they're going to do, and therefore it takes up to 2 years for most of the effect of monetary policy to be felt. So therefore in the short term, it makes it difficult to impact aggregate demand significantly, and therefore it can't have the overall impact on full employment as it could, as budgetary policy potentially could in the short term. So limited short-term impact on AD. All right, and so they are my thoughts in terms of question 1, A, B, C, and D. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Hopefully this makes you feel good about the answers that you wrote. If you have any questions, if you wrote anything different for some of your answers, hit me up. I'll let you know what I think of that. Obviously, these opinions are mine. VCAR could be totally different in how they're thinking this year. So take these with a grain of salt. I'm just trying to make people feel a little bit at ease about how they did, and hopefully you feel like you did really well in the exam. I feel like this is a really fair exam, really, really achievable. I'm kind of a little bit in love with this exam, which I never thought I'd feel about an economics paper, but that is how we are feeling today. I hope you're doing well. Enjoy the rest of your night. As I said in the previous video, take some time to relax. Hopefully you finished exams and you can blow off some steam. You deserve it. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time for question 2. Bye.